So today we are going to be covering our strategic insights from our report we just launched, the 2024 Nonprofit Marketing Report, or the State of Nonprofit Marketing. And so I'm really excited to be able to chat with it through this with you. I have a passion for both marketing and nonprofit organizations. And so before we get into this, I always feel like it's a little bit helpful to share a little bit about who's talking to you and why I'm here giving this information. So my name's Bradley Martin. I'm the VP of Growth Marketing here at Feather. I live out in Nashville, Tennessee. This is my crew. I have four kids, Liam, Luca, Lawson, and Emmy, and I get the pleasure of being married to my wife, Mandy. I have been in the digital marketing space for over 15 years. And really over the last 7 years, I've been focused in the nonprofit tech space. So I've worked at organizations like Kindful and Bloomerang, and I've recently found myself here at Feather and just really love this space, really love working with nonprofit organizations, and especially as it comes to how nonprofits can do marketing better and how they can better engage and build their audience. And so as I mentioned, today we are going to be going through the state of nonprofit marketing. So to give you just a little bit of detail about the state of nonprofit marketing, earlier in the year, we surveyed 446 nonprofit professionals, many of those marketers, but many of them executive directors and director of development, fundraising professionals. And we asked them really 14 key questions on their priorities, initiatives, and plans as it pertained to their marketing initiatives, and a few and some adjacent topics. We talked about their top challenges, their main priorities, and then the investments they're looking to make. And so our goal today is really just to share that information. So we're going to share a lot of the insights that we drove, or a lot of the things that we learned from what your peers are doing. And then in addition to that, I have a handful of thoughts and kind of tips at the end of the presentation. They're a little bit more of my personal insights as I went through the results. And I really wanted to try to provide a few simple tips. To many of you, some of the things I'm going to provide from a tip and tactic standpoint might be things that are obvious. But as we've worked with thousands of organizations, we are always finding ourselves realizing that some of the things that are obvious to many of us aren't obvious to others. And so we're going to go through some of that. Now, before we get too far into the presentation, I do want to just highlight a couple things I'd love for you to keep in mind. Number one is I'd love for this to be interactive. We got some polls we're going to ask you guys to try to keep this a little bit more interactive. But also, like, if you have a question or a comment, something, I welcome you dropping that in the chat. Rachel, my colleague here, is going to be monitoring that. She can answer any questions you might have that she can answer. And then she'll be sending me, themes or questions that come up throughout. But you do not need to hold your questions to the end. I do have a question slide at the end, and we'll answer any questions you have. But as you have questions throughout, feel free to drop those in. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to launch a poll. So I've got about 4 of these poll questions throughout. Part of it's just to see, like, I like to understand the audience I'm talking to. And I wanted to kind of see is, like, does the audience we're talking to here, do you guys resonate or do you guys respond similarly to what we found in the document? And so, Rachel, I just want to make sure that that poll is up. I think you should see it. Yes. Okay. It's up. So I asked, did you participate in the survey this year? It looks like so far, go ahead and get those results in and we will close it. We're going to try to make these relatively quick. So we've got 51 people watching. Looks like about 10 of you have dropped in your quotes or your answers. Okay. We can go ahead and close that poll. And if we can share results, it's going to take just a minute to close here. Admittedly, guys, this is the first time I've used this platform to do a webinar, so I'm kind of learning on the fly as I go. And so I've done a lot of webinars on a lot of different platforms. And so, but Wistia here seems to be take just a minute. So we'll close the next poll just a little bit earlier so we can make sure we get through the content. But it looks like so far, 86% of you, so the majority of you, did not actually participate in the survey. So it's actually really good. I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to hear that. I think the thing that we're going to discover together is, do you guys have the same sentiment around your marketing as what we saw with our other organizations, and so that did participate in the survey. So one more poll real quick before we get into some of the content, and then we'll have a few more throughout. But Rachel, if you go ahead and launch this one, what is your primary focus with your marketing this year? And so what we're really looking for is, like, as a result, what are you attempting to drive out of your marketing this year? Are you looking to drive more community awareness? Are you looking to promote specific events, donor acquisition, donor retention? What is the thing that you would say is your primary goal with your marketing efforts in 2024? So Rachel, you can go ahead and close that one since it does a little bit of a countdown there. So far, it looks like you guys are very closely aligning with what we saw from the survey results. And so I'm going to go ahead and move on in the presentation. But what I'm seeing in the results that you guys just shared is that 65% of you, actually now 68% of you, are focused on donor acquisition as your number one thing you're trying to drive. And so we asked it a little bit differently in the actual survey, but what we learned was the same thing, is that donor acquisition is the primary focus of marketing in most organizations. And when we looked at it, 73.4% of people said that donor acquisition was one of their top 3 priorities this year. Awareness and events was the other 2 that were the 2 that made up the 3 most important priorities this year. But specifically, donor acquisition was the one, when we think about marketing and marketing efforts in an organization, that drove the majority of the priority. So one more poll question real quick. Again, we're going to do a few of these as we go through. Where will you be increasing your spend in marketing channels this year? So this one was a kind of unique one. And so that should pop up for you here in just a minute. But where will you be increasing your spend? Will you be doing it in digital ads, social ads, email marketing, direct mail, TV? What areas will you be investing more in this year? And similarly, this platform doesn't let us ask multiple choice or let you take down more than one. And so we asked this in a similar fashion, where what are your top 3? And I'll show that in just a minute. But again, unsurprisingly, you guys are aligning pretty closely with what we learned in our survey of the 446 organizations we were able to survey. And so we'll go ahead and close that poll. And so what we learned is that organizations are increasing their investment in digital ads and social media ads. So as we looked across all these organizations, there's quite a bit here to look at, and we asked it in a really specific way. But what we saw is that they're increasing investment in digital ads. They're also significantly increasing investment in social ads. So 42% of the responders and 49% of responders said they were going to increase their spend in digital and social. The other thing that we found was that the majority are continuing to do email, and a lot of people are aiming to invest more in email this year. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more in the presentation and some thoughts around email. But, one of the things that we often hear is that email's dead, right? Or email's dying. We've been hearing that since like 2010. And that is just simply not true, right? The one other area that really stood out to me is that, went the wrong way there, is that a lot of organizations are deciding to cut back. The areas where people are cutting back the most is in direct mail and TV, radio, and print, kind of the more traditional marketing venues, which is not surprising with how everything has already made the shift to online in some of these areas. It's I think more of a function of not people not wanting to invest as much in them. It's just that the audience just isn't there as much. And so thought this was really interesting. It felt like this was a really good benchmark for organizations to think about is where are you planning to invest more? Are you planning to invest more in digital and social ads? Planning to invest more or sustain kind of your current investment in email? And then again, where are you cutting back? Like, does that align to what other organizations will do? If you want to inspect this more further, we're going to be sharing all of these stats, in the deck. And then of course you can download the full report. Okay, one last poll question, and then I'll be done with the poll questions for now. But in terms of digital marketing, which channel do you find most effective? So again, this is going to pop up on your screen here. Would love to hear your thoughts here. Which one do you find most effective? And so is it email, Facebook, peer-to-peer, LinkedIn, digital advertising? When I say digital advertising, I more mean like digital ads, not on Facebook. So more like banner ads, things like that. Is it online communities or other social media channels? What are you finding that is most effective? Okay, Rachel, you can go ahead and close that. Thank you so much. What we saw, so this again, not surprising, aligns pretty closely. It's funny how that works out. I'm glad that worked out. But email is still the most effective digital marketing channel. And so this is, I don't think any of us are surprised by this at this point. It seems like every year, everyone seems to still be shocked that email is the most effective channel. We asked individuals, what are the 3 most effective channels? So again, you got some pretty interesting items here. So in terms of digital marketing, which ones are the most effective at reaching your supporters? Again, email far and away the best at reaching subscribers. Facebook and Instagram being the second most. And then you get into kind of just a slew of other options like peer-to-peer, LinkedIn, digital advertising that different organizations were finding to be successful in reaching their supporters. And so again, this is just another really great way to benchmark where's your organization, and are you investing in these things, and are they things that you might want to consider? Now, there's a lot of other trends. Those were the 3 insights that, as I read the report, I really felt like stood out to me. I thought they were really good and some of the more impactful nuggets that you could take away. Now, there was a few other trends I just want to run through. One was, how did your online giving grow or decline between 2022 and 2023? So this, to me, was pretty interesting. Now, many individuals who filled out the survey, 40% of them roughly, didn't know, right, when they filled out the survey. But if you take those individuals out, the vast majority of individuals said their digital fundraising or their online giving grew in 2023 over 2022. And again, I don't think this is surprising. I think, during COVID and during the pandemic, we saw a big shift to move towards online giving. And it wasn't only by the public, it was also by organizations promoting more of that channel. And so I think we've continued to have that wind in our sails as we've went post-pandemic and things like that. So that has really been a trend we continue to see since 2020. Another one is, what challenges do you foresee in achieving your marketing goals this year? Limited budget and resources. This is something that, I feel like in my 7 years of working with nonprofits, it's the number one thing I hear, not only around marketing, but almost around any initiative that nonprofits have that's operational, is that there's just limited budgets and resources. And so I think that's just something, when you're starting to think more and more about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about automation and things like that, but how you are working smarter, right? And instead of harder. And I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but I think there's so many opportunities for many of organizations to start to invest in automation and tools that can really help them be able to do more with the resources they do have. And so sometimes there's some budget constraints that make it difficult to make that possible. But I think when you start to really think about the benefit that can be there, it's a really good trade-off. And so again, staffing constraint and resources, I kind of see those things as the two similar things, and then adapting to changing consumer behavior. I think this is a unique one because I think there's so many new platforms. I would argue that human behavior still is very similar to what it's always been. And so I think there's something to consider about whether it's human behavior that's changing or it's or where that behavior is happening that is changing. There's obviously some human behavior is changing, but I think where the real focus is, where's that behavior going versus what's actually changing. Okay, keep clicking on the wrong screen here. So what emerging marketing trends are you investing in addressing in the upcoming year? So this one was honestly a little surprising to me. It's not surprising because so many of the platforms are so video focused now, but I was surprised to see so many organizations are committing to go be more focused on video marketing. And so I have a lot of thoughts around this. I think everyone should consider doing this. I really do. I also think, though, that it doesn't have to be a huge production all the time. I mean, these iPhones we have and the technology we have in our pocket can come off super authentic and well done. Just a video from your executive director sent in an email can be so human and so easy to relate to. And so I think when we think about video marketing, it oftentimes becomes really almost overwhelming to think about, well, gosh, I need videographers, I need scripts, I need all these things. I just don't necessarily think that that's true. I think you can do exceptional high impact video marketing just with an iPhone. Also, there's a lot of focus on personalization and AI powered tools. Those are things that I think, again, are important, and they really can help us resonate, especially around personalization. But I don't think we have to overcomplicate it. So again, as you're thinking about benchmarking, it's a really good thing here to look at some of these stats, look at the presentation afterwards, sit with it a little bit, and figure out, like, what of these is your organization doing, or what should they be considering doing? So I did want to talk about the elephant in the room. And I think there's a big elephant in the room, and it's what everyone keeps talking about. It's one of the hottest topics, and that's AI, right? And so how is your organization approaching the adoption of artificial intelligence in its marketing efforts, if at all, right? There's very few. I don't know. My face might be in the way here. I don't know if I don't think there's a way to move it. But at the bottom, it says actively investing in AI. That's only 6.5%. So 6.5% of the 450 roughly organizations are actively investing in AI, right? The majority of people are exploring it, but haven't formalized anything yet. I would say that's the same for us here at Feather. When we're thinking about marketing, we're exploring it, but we haven't formalized anything particularly yet. I have a further insight in this, so I'm gonna hold back and give you my opinions and get to that in just a minute. But there's, I think, a lot for us to consider around where AI holds its place right now in our marketing efforts. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of transition. So those were some of the key questions we asked, some of the key data points that we discovered as we went through our documents. And as we analyzed all the response, those were the things that we drove, right? Or the insights we drove. I'm going to now shift to just some of my kind of own personal insights, and also some kind of tips or things that maybe you can individually take away and consider doing at your organization based off some of this data and based off some of the benchmarking and insights that we found. So first off, I did want to start. I thought this was such a great quote from my friend Taylor Shanklin over at Barley. Um, Big fans of the team over there. And what she says here is that there are so many bright and shining objects. Some are great, some are a flash in the pan. Nonprofits need to keep doing the basics really well and keep doing the channels that they know are working well. I think this is such an important thing to remember. Even as I'm about to go through some things you could consider tactically implementing at your organization, I think it's really important to remember you don't need to do them all, right? And you don't need to focus on all the things at once. I think that is a challenge that we see. In fact, right, one of a couple of the challenges we see across organizations, right, is that there is this constant change. There's so much going on at any given time, and it feels really, really hard to keep up. And I think what I would tell you is don't try to. Like there's certain things that you probably want to invest more in, but look at some of these benchmarks and you'll see that no one's keeping up, right? Even the best digital marketers out there that are in for-profit and nonprofit organizations are struggling to keep up with all the constant change. The other thing to keep in mind is competition is fierce. And it's not only competition. I would say when I think about competition, it is not competition with other nonprofit organizations. Of course, that exists. But I think it's competition for your attention, right? Like I think about, in my inbox, in my personal inbox, my email inbox, if I get an organization or an email from Both Hands, which is one of my favorite organizations here in Nashville, am I paying attention to that, or am I paying attention to the 3 emails I got from Target today with their most recent ad circulation, right? There's just so much competition for our attention, right? There's also a lot of confusion, right? And what I feel like as a marketer, where a lot of the confusion comes from, is just all the information that's thrown at us, right? There is data out the wazoo. There's just so much information, and then we get into this place of an analysis paralysis, where we have a hard time determining, I think often, what should we be focused on and what is the signal versus the noise. And then obviously we've already talked about it, but there's so many competing priorities, and there's so little resources, and so few and so little budget in a lot of organizations to be able to make the impact we really want to make, right? In terms of the change in the organization we want to do. And so one of the things I want to go through is we talk a lot about like the difference between typical marketing and what we like to call good marketing, right? And so typical marketing we often see in a lot of organizations, based on just the things I just shared, is that organizations typically find themselves in kind of 3 categories. And it is either one, that they're really doing nothing. And what I mean by that is that it's not that they're doing nothing, it's that they're not doing anything to evolve, right? And it's because it's confusing, it's challenging, there's so much competition, there's competing priorities, and it's hard to figure out what's the right first step forward, right? The other and maybe even worse scenario is trying to do everything, right? Like if you're trying to do everything, and as a digital marketer that's been doing digital marketing for 15 years, I understand this pressure to try to do everything all at once. And that is absolutely a recipe for disaster. And then the third thing we often see is just ad hoc, campaigns. So they're not well organized. They're on individual channels, and oftentimes these seem to fall flat, and that often creates a disappointing results. So one of the things we talk about again a lot is good marketing. What is good marketing look like? And the first one is that it's audience first, right? That you are focused on who am I trying to talk to and what's the best way to reach them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about segmentation and things like that, but audience first is the thing we really encourage organizations to stay with. You don't need to talk to everyone all at once. You need to think about who are the most important audiences for me to be engaging with at my organization based on what I'm trying to share. Again, I think automation is a really, really important thing for us to all consider. There's so many great platforms that can make so much of the work we do easier, and we can set it up once and forget it. You can't ever really forget it because you need to come back and make sure it's still accurate and things like that. But you can definitely make it to where, one of the simplest things that I see organizations often struggle with is just sending post donation receipts. And there's tons of platforms out there that can make that just automatic. Set it and forget it, and the post donation receipt will go right out after someone gives a donation online. But if you're using a platform, oftentimes like PayPal or something like that, those receipts don't go out automatically. And some of the fundraising platforms, even their receipts don't go out automatically. The other thing to consider is, are your campaigns omni-channel? Like, are you reaching individuals across multiple different channels, email, Facebook, advertising? If you are still doing digital advertising or paid media like TV and things like that, are you reaching them in multiple places? And then lastly, how are you measuring your results? I think this is a thing that many organizations have a lot of data, right? We are totally bombarded with data points, but are you truly measuring what matters most? Are you measuring your ROI and the actual end result of the campaigns you're running? And so those are some things to consider as you think about, like, am I doing these things well? Okay, so here, I want to be clear, kind of giving my disclaimer that a lot of these are my insights. As I consumed this data, read through the report we put together, these are a lot of things that I found myself kind of stepping away with. And so number one is, your audience is more than your email list, right? It's important to gain a deeper understanding of your audience and invest in building a broader reach. Now, I think, like, a lot of you might respond to me and say, Bradley, of course we know our audience is more than our email list. But I think when you think through it through the lens of marketing, what we often find is that our email list is kind of the end all be all of our marketing efforts, right? It is a thing that we hold fast to. It's a thing that we put a lot of value in, and it does hold a lot of value. But there's a couple things I want to just share as tactical ideas that you might want to consider as you think about your email list and your audience. And so number one is, if you haven't taken the time, this ended up being a little granulated, which is a bummer, but is defining your audience segments. So this is actually Feather the company, right? Our audience segments in our platform, Feather, right? And so this is where we're able to use our tool. And whether you're using Feather or whether you're using a donor management platform or you're using your email marketing platform, thinking about defining who your key audiences are. I would also caution you about trying to get too segmented. See a lot of organizations who have dozens and dozens of segments, and that becomes hard to manage. And oftentimes you get lesser results because you're overly segmenting your messaging. But one of the things to think about is, one of the unique things you're able to do in Feather is this: we do not have an email list of 1 million people. What we do have, though, is a way to segment all of our website visitors and actually start to create marketing lists off of those. So even before they are a known email address to us, we're able to use this data to serve ads on Facebook and really further our engagement with those people who've come to our website and shown some level of engagement. And so that's a key segment for us, is people who are unknown to us. We don't have a lot of personal identifiable information about them, but they've spent time on our website. And then we develop specific campaigns we want to run to those individuals. And so I think as a nonprofit organization, this is a huge opportunity. And I would ask you, do you have the ability to do that? Do you have a platform where you're able to truly track those people who've come to your site, but you don't actually know who they are yet? Another key opportunity is finding similar audiences. This is typically thought through around like affinity marketing. So like you're finding people who have similar results. Grace, this organization does this through Feather's platform and is able to find similar type organizations. And they've had really great success with building their audience by doing that. And then serving ads, digital ads. This one looks like it's showing up on, a mobile game of sorts. But you can really start to make sure that your ad dollars are going further. It's making sure that when you're actually showing up in front of people, you're showing up in front of people that align with the things that the affinity and your mission more. I think one of the things to think about around this is you can do this in Facebook or Google or other places. But it's sometimes then hard to connect the dots all the way back to what action did they take, and how did someone that I run an affinity campaign end up turning into someone on my email list and then ultimately turning into a donor. Those are things that as you think about kind of maturing your processes, where you can tie all of this together. And so the question is, how are you getting in front of like-minded people? That's really the thing, is, are you doing that, and how are you going about doing that? This is kind of goes back to the audience segments I was talking about a little bit earlier, but are you running ads to your website visitors? And there's many different platforms to do this through. Google, Facebook, LinkedIn all offer some of this functionality where you can track who's come to your site and then serve ads to them. But this is one of the most underutilized and easy to execute programs or campaigns that we see that organizations are not doing, right? Only a great website may have a 5% conversion rate. So if you drive 100 people to your website, 5 of them are going to fill out a form or donate to you. I think what my question always becomes, what are you doing with the other 95? What are you doing with the people who clicked on your ad on Facebook, visited your site because someone was running a peer-to-peer campaign, came across you at a local, community event and came to your site to learn more, but then at that moment just didn't have the ability or the desire to donate at that very moment? How do you stay in front of them and stay top of mind? And this is a great way to make sure your advertising budget is going further for you to get in front of the people who have already shown some interest. I wanted to point out, this was another insight as I was driving. I'm going to look at the chat really quick. There's a really great question here from Zoe. I'm going to read it for a second, so bear with me as I pause because it's a little long. So this is a really kind of great question. There's a lot of detail here, but it really gets to the heart of Zoe's org has a really unclear donor list, right? And so how do you start segmentation? I think one of the things I find useful is to really just go through and almost eyeball, what data do I already have about these individuals? Do I have anything about their location? Do I have anything about what appeals they've shown interest in the past? And then, you kind of mentioned, do you send out a donor survey? It's a good starting point, right? What I would consider, though, is how are people showing you information about what they're interested in, maybe without having to fill out a survey? I'm a huge fan of surveys. So I just want to call that out, that I'm not saying don't do a survey, but if you send out a donor survey to 100 people, maybe 10 or 20 will fill it out if you're really lucky. And so I think figuring out ways to gather what I would just call assumptions. And so a great way to do this is, can you see what pages they're viewing on your website? When you send an appeal, what part of that appeal do they click on? Do they respond to a certain type of appeals versus others? So, I'm trying to think of a good example of that. But imagine that you have 2 or 3 different programs you're running. Do they always seem to interact with one type of program versus another? So imagine you're an animal organization or a humane society. Do you have someone who's always viewing the volunteer information but never views adoption information? Well, maybe by that alone, you could start to say, let's stop sending them so much about adoptions right now because we don't want to bombard them with that information, but let's continue to keep them engaged in the volunteer work. And so I think there's some tools and information that you can use that you can really just kind of glean or infer what people are interested in by their online behavior. So I hope that's a little helpful, Zoe. I think the biggest thing is just taking a little bit of time to figure out what information do you have, right? And then you asked a follow-on question about, everyday newsletter audience to segment into appeals. I mean, I definitely think you should be segmenting your everyday newsletter audience into appeals. I think if you're providing a lot of value and you're showing what your organization's out doing, you do earn the right oftentimes to come and share some information. So Rachel just shared a great link there you can look at as well. Okay, sorry to get derailed there, but I love the questions. It's much better to respond to something rather than just talk directly at the screen. So I wanted to highlight that email is still effective, but it's becoming increasingly noisy. I'm going to share something that is embarrassing. My personal inbox has 43,000 unread emails in it. And that is embarrassing for me to share, but I have had this inbox since I was in college way too many years ago. And I have so many times, it's like the end of every year, I go, I'm going to get to a zero inbox. I never get there. I knock down a few thousand messages. I try to opt out as much as I can, but it seems like continuously I'm getting hundreds of messages in my inbox a day, and it's just impossible to keep up. And so I think we need to start thinking. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate you making me feel normal. But I think as we continue to think about our email inboxes, they're just getting so noisy, right? And so I think one of this is one quick tip, right, that I would ask you is, how are you using your email list to get in front of individuals other than just the inbox? I'm not saying you should stop sending them emails. You absolutely should continue to send them emails. I also think we oftentimes, as marketers, find ourselves feeling like, gosh, we're going to overwhelm people. Like, you could probably, almost every person on this webinar, I bet, could double your email sends and your opt-out rate wouldn't go through the roof, or it wouldn't increase marginally even. I think we often are concerned that we're over bombarding our audience. I think that's a myth, right? So I should have put that in here as a slide. It just kind of came to me as stream of consciousness. But you should consider emailing your list more, right? Again, I get 3 emails a day from Target, and somehow I'm still on their list. I don't know why I haven't opted out yet, because every now and then they have a good deal and I go buy something for my kids, right? So I think but most of the time I just delete their stuff and move on. But I think the other thing is, if you have stellar open rates, right? You're getting 30% of individuals to open your email, and open rates aren't a great metric of success, to be honest, right? Open rates just tell you that someone scrolled through their phone and that email loaded on their device, whether that's their phone or their computer or whatnot. So I think my question is are you using that list to further engage people where they're spending other time online? Are you using that list to target them on social media? Are you using that list to target them in advertising? Are you using that just to remind them that you're there? Yes. Yes, this is an email mapping campaign in Feather. Yes, exactly. And sorry, I should have probably said that. But yes, email mapping is a great way to go and reach people. And this is something that the Humane Society of North Central Florida has had a lot of success doing, is going out and using their email list to upload that into Feather and being able to target. And again, you can do these in other platforms as well. So you can do this in Facebook and Google and things like that. It's sometimes a little bit harder because it's not all in one centralized place and it's harder to keep up to date. But this is definitely something that you should be considering, is how am I using my email list to go beyond the inbox? Okay, so I want to circle back around to AI. So AI is here to stay, but it's not taking our jobs. I say yet because I think there's a long way to go, but I think there's probably, if we're being honest with ourselves, there's some concern about that. I would say it's my personal opinion is it's super far along in the future. But if you're not using AI, so I think if we went back to the survey, I'm not going to go all the way back through the slides. Many individuals are not using it at all or don't have any dedicated plans. Here's the things I would tell you to consider about AI, right? Is ChatGPT is the one that's out there. There's Bard, that's Google's, or maybe it's called Gemini now. But I would say that AI is a great tool to use as a thought partner. And so I'm going to tell a little bit of a funny story. My wife and I are sitting at the dinner table a few days ago, and we're trying to come up with meals for the rest of the month. And we're trying to kind of do meal planning. And we realized every idea that we brought up was one that was like, we're tired of, And I was like, ooh, this would be a great idea for AI. And so I loaded ChatGPT on my phone and I asked it to give me 30 meals that my children from 4 to 11-year-old would also enjoy, and give me a meal plan for 4 weeks. And within seconds, I had this great list of meals to consider. And my wife and I both reviewed it together, and we took like 10 of them off the list and was like, these are really good ideas. And then we asked it to give us recipes, and we got the recipes. Now, a lot of those were not great ideas. There were things that our kids wouldn't eat or our family wouldn't eat. But it's a great thing if you want to go generate ideas, right? I think it's a great brainstorming partner, AI is. If you wanted to generate some headlines or things for your next appeal, right? It's a great tool to go out and just ask it to generate ideas, and it can be a great kicking off standpoint. The other thing to do is to build reusable prompts. And so if you haven't taken the time to learn a lot about how to write proper AI prompts, I would definitely say to invest some time there. It really can make an AI platform much, much more valuable, right? You can ask it to refine its responses. So I think like as you get a response, just ask it to refine that. Tell it back like, hey, this is a great starting point. For some reason, I always find myself talking to it like it's a human. But I'm like, hey, thank you so much for this great response. Can you make it briefer, right? Can you write it in a more simple way? Can you add this to it? And it will rewrite it and give you another result that is similar, but hopefully refined. I think another great thing to do is use it as an editor and grammar checker, right? So if you're anything like me, right, grammar is not my biggest strength. My wife would tell you that it's one of my worst strengths. And so, or it's not a strength at all, maybe is the right way to say that. But, it's a great tool to say like, hey, I don't want you to change this, but can you just check for grammar and spelling and things like that? And it does a great job of that. I would say, especially if you are typing thing, can you preserve people's privacy when you do this? I think Ruth, it's a good question. So Ruth just asked, can you preserve people's privacy when you do this? I would highly encourage to never put, personal identifiable information. Of course, you have to sign up for these platforms, and they've got really good terms of service as part of them. But I would be cautious about what information you're feeding into it. That's just a personal, kind of protection of mine that I would always use as a filter is, I would do the same if I'm searching on Google, is to be cautious with what information you're putting into it. I wouldn't be putting, my full email list or my full contact list into ChatGPT ever. But I would use it more in a standpoint of helping me write potential content or potential appeals. And then I might have to go back and change out like, first name, email address, or whatever, based on the template it gives me. The last thing I would say is always fact check it. So one of the things is, that's Amelia just pointed out. Sorry, I'm reading and trying to present at the same time. I'm not a great multitasker, but Amelia just pointed out that their AI policy at their org is to not allow using anything in our CRM related to PI and any AI. I think that's great. I think it's a really, really great point, Amelia, is not, as you're thinking about AI, not doing that. Last thing, always fact check. These tools are notorious. You can read, Twitter. I refuse to call it X, but Twitter, post after post after post of people going to use what AI told them, and it like sorting or sourcing. Yes. Using sources that are totally don't even exist. And I went and tested this out not too long ago and asked for ChatGPT to write an article and cite sources. And every single link it provided was a broken link. And so I would just be really cautious, especially if you're asking a platform like ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these platforms to write you long form content, to be really cautious to make sure that what it's actually saying is truthful, because there's a lot of folks finding that the data is just not accurate when it provides data, when it provides sources, things like that. It can really get you in a little bit of trouble. Okay, this was a quote from Julia Campbell. I'm a big fan of hers that I just wanted to kind of leave you guys with before I wrap up here. And that is that as you think about all this stuff and you think about marketing, right, you're really just trying to share the stories of your organization and the impact you're making. So stories raise more money. They raise more awareness, more reach, and engagement than any other form of content. So we talk about all this stuff around marketing, but really what you're trying to do is at the end of the day, share the impact your organization is making with the people that you think it will resonate most with, right? That's it, right? And so I think there's so many great ways to do that, and it does not have to be overly complicated. I think that's the thing, is that all of this stuff seems like so much, but it doesn't have to be, right? I would be remiss if I didn't take just a moment to make sure that everyone here understands, if you're not familiar with Feather, we are a nonprofit marketing platform, right? We work with organizations to do all of these things that we just talked about, right? We work with, we help organizations know, grow, and engage their audiences with easy to use advertising, email, and digital engagement tools. So we help people with the email mapping, with the retargeting, with audience segmentation, all of those things, right? And so, we work with over 1,500 nonprofits and associations across the world. And, some of our customers really are finding really good results with us, right? Nicole over at the American Epilepsy Society points out that they've consistently been able to grow their audience using Feather. And Jared over at the International Justice Mission, right, points out, what's nice about Feather is you can aggregate everything together in one platform and have a unified approach, right? And so if you are interested at all in learning more about Feather and how we help organizations do all these things, feel free just to drop the word demo in the comments and we'll have someone reach out and schedule something. We'd love to have a conversation, learn about your organization, learn about your goals, and see if we could help. So feel free to drop that in. Now, Katie, now we're going to jump into questions here. Was that related to mapping campaign, Ruth? I had the same question. So Ruth's question was around, can you preserve people's privacy when you do this? So I guess you're asking, like, when you're doing email mapping, can you preserve people's, can you preserve their privacy? And I think, like, as any technology, I would say, like, I can only really talk about this through the Feather lens, right? And so, we take data privacy extremely important. We have multiple, SOC 2 certifications, things like that, that help ensure that we have, the best in security. Our security has been, actually reviewed and audited to ensure that we're following all the best practices that would be required by the biggest platforms in the world. And so I think like the thing about like email mapping is the data actually really becomes, you know, uh, w- uh, just one zeros. What's the word I'm looking for? Where it becomes, you know, where it's unidentifiable. And so what we end up doing is when this gets uploaded into Facebook or Google, it gets mapped to a ID that is that person's ID in that platform. And so really the email gets removed, right? And so as you think about email mapping, it's really that you're taking that email address and you're asking platforms like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, like, hey, or platform, do you recognize this email address and do you have a user that maps to this email address? And in a lot of cases, individuals do, right? They have a LinkedIn profile that's mapped to their email address. And so you're not really sharing new information. It's just using the email address, which in most platforms is their user ID. And so that's kind of the connection that's being made. Then that ends up you let's say you have 10,000 email addresses, you upload that information, then ultimately what ends up happening is that information the platform builds an audience. But you can't see as a user like Bradley Martin, I log into Facebook, I can't see a list of every individual and then like what their interests are. All I'm able to see is that there's 6,000 people in this list, and then I'm able to run an ad to that list. And so there's a lot of checks and balances when you think about data privacy to be certain that we are all these platforms, including Feather, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, are all very careful to say that like, hey, we're not going to let you, take your information and enrich it with ours, let's say, right? Like there's platforms that do that. But really, when you think about ad platforms, they're basically just saying, hey, you uploaded 10,000 people. We were able to match that to, let's say, 7,000. You can run ads to them. But for you to get personal identifiable information, they have to come back to your website and give that information to you. So sorry, that was a little bit of a long-winded answer and took me a few minutes to wrap all the way around it, but I hope maybe that was helpful. I'd love to hear if there's any other questions about the data, about some of these tips I suggested, anything like that. No, it takes just a moment here to get questions in. And again, if you would like, if you're at all interested in learning more about Feather, feel free to drop the word demo in. We'll get someone in touch with you to go over some of that information. Thanks, Katie. I hope that was helpful. Okay, well, we'll give it just a few more minutes here. Rachel, I don't know if there was anything I missed. So there was an earlier question about, I think when we were talking about what's the most effective strategy, is it the highest reach or the most conversions? It's a really great question. And the answer, I think would be, was a little bit left up to your own interpretation. I think like, I would always tell people that I would focus on what has the highest conversion, not necessarily the most reach. That's my own personal bias, though. And I guess it depends on the goal of the campaign. Ruth said, like, do lists get sold? Like, no. Now that's not to say that things, there's not a risk of that at some point. But I would say when you're using like a tool like Feather, probably many of your donor management platforms, even other marketing platforms, and you're using Facebook, Google, you own that list. And this is part of the reason it is like, stayed anonymous or anonymized, is because they don't want people selling those lists, right? And so, No, I think you can feel really confident now in our current um, level is that those lists are not sold, and you're not really like if you're doing email mapping specifically, you're again you're just providing them information they already have. They already have the email address, and that's the only data point you're sending over. They are not, if they don't have that email address, they just kick it back to you and say, hey, we don't have this. It's not like they take that email and go do something with it. And so I think, I understand the concern around some of that because several years ago, there was some of those things happening. And then I know there was a large Facebook lawsuit around some of that. Yeah, I think it was like 10, 12 years ago, because there was some triangulation of data happening that Facebook wasn't even aware is possible. But they have stopped all of that now. And so I think you can feel really confident that if you're using the primary major players like Facebook, Meta, Google, LinkedIn, Instagram, things like that, that you don't have to have a concern about that you're putting your information out there for it to be sold. Okay, well, we're at time. I just want to tell everyone I really appreciate you taking the time today to sit with us, go through this information. We'll be sending out the recording and all the slides afterwards. But I hope everyone has a great rest of your Wednesday. And thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it.